Hey there, friends. Today we're about to embark on an exciting project to give the stall garage wall a rustic makeover, but with a twist. My original plan was to create a shiplap or wood plank wall using nothing but plywood strips. It's an affordable and creative way to add some character to your space. So join us as we transform this into this. This video is one part of a larger shop organization and clean that I've been slowly undergoing for the last many months. I have plans to release a few videos on the overall process, with some smaller videos detailing specific aspects such as this one. With winter around the corner, I've finally gotten around to finishing the insulation vapor barrier inside the shop. As much as I'll miss having open stud base to collect dust and to feel the cool Canadian winter air blowing through, insulation is a must if I want to have any chance of using the shop once the temperature drops. In my situation, I'll be attaching plywood strips directly to the studs of my walls. Without a solid backing of plywood or drywall behind the slats, the fit and finish will suffer a little bit. However, it'll still meet my expectations for the garage. I'll give you a couple ideas at the end of the video if you want a more polished final product. I have a local shop that recycles and sells otherwise scrap plywood offcuts for use in whatever project you can come up with, for pennies on the dollar. They have an assortment of plywood types, widths, and lengths. If you live in the Greater Toronto Area or near Peterborough, Ontario, I highly suggest you check out Cavan Woods. I picked up a load of 1/4 inch thick, 8-foot long eucalyptus plywood with a minimum width of about 4 1/4 inches. The edges were fairly straight, but they were not parallel or consistent between boards. Since I want clean and crisp edges for every piece to be uniform, I run everything through the table saw. I made my first cut at 4 3/8 in order to clean up one side, and I flipped the board around and run it through at 4 1/4 inches. This took me a couple hours, but can be summed up in about 15 seconds of video. Let's take a second here to talk about the elephant in the room. Typically, I'd never recommend wearing gloves when operating tools. However, under certain circumstances, I think the benefit outweighs the risk. In this particular situation, the temperature was about freezing, my hands were starting to go numb, and I had been getting splinters like crazy from this plywood. At the end of the day, only you are responsible for your safety and your life, so make sure you make thoughtful decisions. My original plan was to try and have the boards mate in some sort of way. At only a 1/4 inch thick, there was no way to create a tongue and groove, which would have been the ideal situation. I tried running the boards through the saw at 45-degree angle so that they would lock together. However, it proved difficult to keep the boards running straight since they were so thin. I ended up with a couple hockey stick test pieces, and the small potential benefits didn't seem worth the effort. My other plan was to mill rabbets on the edges of the boards to create a shiplap joint. I did a little test and ran into a couple issues. Again, I had difficulty keeping things uniform, I ran into some tear out, and honestly, I didn't like the way the 1/8 inch deep shiplap looked on such thin boards. It also occurred to me at this point that if I did have grooves along all the walls, all I was doing was creating hundreds of little dust shelves. My last option was to just stack boards as they were. I did a quick test and the joints were tight, the install was quick, and the boards required no additional milling other than cutting them to width. It seemed obvious that this was the route to go. The most important row of boards were definitely our first row, as they set the foundation for the entire wall. Ideally, you'll want this perfectly straight and perfectly level. Easiest way to get this done? Laser level, but you don't need one. I dare say it's more important to get your first row perfectly straight instead of perfectly level. If your row isn't straight, you're going to start getting gaps at the seams and joints, which is less than ideal. Using a chalk line or even just a string line as a dry line will allow you to get perfectly straight starter row. I decided to start near the top of my wall since that was my longest undisturbed line. Now, it's just a matter of getting your boards and cutting them so they break on the studs. You could use a tape measure, but it's probably easier and more accurate to just take the board, hold it in place, and make a little tick mark. A miter saw will definitely make this whole process go faster, but you could totally do this with a circular saw if you wanted to. I'm just using 1 1/4 inch 18 gauge brads to install these boards. I'm putting 2 nails on each stud, which means this is a super quick installation. I chose to go with plywood strips as a wall covering for a few reasons. First, I wanted something quick to install, easily repairable, easily removable if I want to add electrical, and I didn't want to spend a small fortune. That excluded drywall right off the bat, from a labor perspective and based on the fact that drywall is so expensive right now. I could have used solid sheets of plywood or OSB, but they would have been a little annoying when I need to run electrical. More importantly, even the cheapest 7/16" OSB would have run me almost 500 loonies. Sure, it may have been convenient to hang stuff anywhere, but it's really not a big deal because I can always find a nice solid stud. With the material I found at Cavan Woods, the wall carvings for the whole place were going to run me well under $100, and that's with material to spare. Eventually, I have plans to do the ceiling, but it's not high on the priority list. If you don't live near a place like Cavan Woods, buying sheets of plywood and ripping them into strips would still save you a ton of money and time over buying solid wood and milling it and installing it in a similar way. You could take half-inch plywood and get a look that is very similar to shiplap if you wanted for just a fraction of the price. Now let me show you how easy it is to pop a piece off, or even an entire row if you wanted, just so you could run electrical or get access to the studs. All you need is a small punch, a hammer, and maybe a thin pry bar. As we approach the end of the wall, I'm going to use some additional strips to trim around the door. We can do the same thing as a baseboard or a ceiling trim. I'm not going to cover those right now because I have a little more work I need to get done before I can put those trims in. If I wanted a better final product, I would install solid backing behind these boards. If I had bare studs, I'd install some 7/16 OSB or drywall. With OSB backing, you can basically nail anywhere and everywhere, which makes stacking the boards super easy. With drywall, I would chalk line all my vertical studs and break the boards on the studs if I could. Since you're kind of nailing blindly, I'd also add a dab of construction adhesive at all the short joints just to help keep them solid to the wall. An advantage of the full backing is that you don't have flex in the boards between studs, and it would also allow you to quickly run a sander over the whole wall to clean up any messiness or smooth out finish between coats of clear or paint. And there you have it, a stunning garage wall transformation using plywood strips to create this natural wood look. It's a budget-friendly DIY project that allows you to add warmth and character to your space. Don't forget, you can customize it to suit your style and preferences. Happy building!